So I'm really, really excited tonight to be here with Dr. Tjanara, who is one of our amazing Greens. I think everybody is familiar with Tjanara. Yay. Hello, Tjanara. Tjanara is our Senate candidate in the election that is yet to be called, but is hotly debated in the context of COP26 and various things that we would like to have a different mob in charge. And he is hoping this is the start of that difference. We will see. And Tjanara's a Wakka Wakka woman, and Tjanara has had a lot of experience and history, and I'm going to miss some of these things, Tjanara, so you should jump in. Unionist, academic, experience in the mining sector, experience in negotiating a lot of First Nations treaties and policies and positions, experience in the community sector. What have I missed, Tjanara?
Academia.
Author.
Yeah.
Public servant.
Public servant and university lecturer in Indigenous studies.
University lecturer. And
grandmother, mother. The most important thing.
That's about 500 years of experience right there. Good on you.
Oh, and I'm only 63.
And Tjanara, we're going to have a chat to Tjanara, and we'll be running through the questions, and then we'll open up to questions from the floor. But Tjanara, I'm going to start with our first thing. Would you be able to welcome us to country?
So I'll do the acknowledgement to country.
Acknowledgement, yep. Thank you.
Everyone, because I'm Wakka Wakka and Woolly Woolly from the Jawan Jumbi Nation, and today, this evening, we are on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So I'll sing a song because I always do that for my welcomes and my acknowledgements. And this song comes from our Wakka Wakka country. It's a medicine song, a song about water. Canberra lives on the lake. We've got plenty of water here. It's a good song. Yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. Yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. Dibani wanya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. Yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. So I want to acknowledge the elders and the ancestors of this place, Ngunnawal country and Ngambri country to the east, Wiradjuri to the west, Gundungurra to the north, and Ngarago to the south. We thank all the ancestors and the elders of these places for taking care of country for thousands and thousands of years so that we would have the benefit of living and working and playing on it now and enjoying everything that it has to offer for us. Welcome all of you here and anyone who is First Nations from their own country and from this country to this event tonight. And thank Joe for beginning it. Uapanya.
Thanks, Tjanara. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Tjanara, we have this format where I tend to ask the same 10 questions because it's quite interesting to get different answers every time. So I'm going to ask you 10 questions. And my first question is quite an easy one that could be very long or very short. Can you just tell us who you are and what drives you?
Who I am? You know, that's an amazing question because people usually start off with talking about what they do when they asked who they are. And so I always try to make an effort to not do that. So who I am is a person who has lived 63 years on this planet as a human being. In our culture, we believe that we're spirit beings before we become human. And so I believe that, you know, it's my spirit, that Wandjina part of me, the Kurumpa part of me that is truly who I am. And we believe in reincarnation. So we come and we live in a body, we live a life, we have relationships with people and the planet and all the living things in it. And then we go into the Chukapa and we come back again. So who I am is a bit of a mystery, but in this birth, at least, I'm Tjanara Goreng Goreng, and my identity culturally is that I'm a First Nations woman and come from the nation, the Djau and Jumbi, which is in central Queensland. And we have 3 clans there, the Wakka Wakka, the Wooli Wooli and the Goreng Goreng, and they take up most of the space between Gladstone and Bundaberg and right over the Great Dividing Range out to the west a bit. And so who I am is that person, but also I'm a mother. I have a 37-year-old daughter. Being a mother's been very important to me. And, well, you spend most of your life doing it, hey, from the time you start until the time you go or they go. And then I'm now a grandmother to a little 3.5-year-old, and that's even more special. So I get to mother again, but give her back to her mother, which is even nicer. So who I am is also the daughter of an Aboriginal woman who had an amazing life and gave me a lot of, I guess, power and values because she was a strong woman. She lived through a very difficult time in central Queensland, and that made me a person that is very much into justice and advocacy for those who do not have all the benefits of society that comes from, you know, those who are born rich or who make money or who live in nice places or have lots of things or are able to do those kind of things. So having lived a life like that in, I guess, you know, we were poor, but I didn't really know it when I was a child. I knew I was Aboriginal, but didn't know that I was Aboriginal until kids at school made a big deal out of it, you know, by being racist. So I guess, you know, I spent my life doing lots of things, and now who I am is this person who's made a choice when I was 16 to have lots of lived and life experience, particularly around work. But I was just so interested in the world that I wanted to travel it. I wanted to do as many jobs as I could. I wanted to learn everything that I could about the world. And there's still so much left to learn. So that's who I am. I've been a wife as well. And in a way, I'm still a wife because my ex-husband is living with us as we look after him. He has Alzheimer's. And so my daughter and I are caring for him in his old age. And yes, what drives me? Well, you didn't ask me that question, but I see it in the question. And what drives me is that I want the world to be a much better place for everybody can make a choice to have what they need to have, and that everybody has the necessities of life. Some people say to me, oh, you just dream too big. Well, my view is we got to dream big, you know, you've got to in order to have a purpose in the world. And I'm driven by that, I think. I want people to really have what they want to have and be given that and be able to achieve that and do whatever they want to do in the world. That's what really drives me. And I'm also driven a bit by my child, you know, and that's because I want to be the kind of mother that she looks up to and not aspires to be, because I want her to be herself, but I want her to be proud of the mother that she has, because I was very proud of my mother and my grandmother and all the strong women in my family because they kept us all together.
I love, Tjanara, how your story and your identity is so pinned to relationships and to all these significant women around you. You're in this tapestry of really important women. That's fantastic. That might lead into the next one and it might not. Tjanara, tell me what culture means to you.
Yeah, lots of interesting questions you sent tonight. So, you know, I could easily just say culture means being a First Nations woman. But culture is really, for me, a representation of many, many things. It's a representation of the way in which you relate to other people in the world. It's, one could say that it's part of your identity. So I could say, what's your culture? And I could say, it's Wakka Wakka, Wooli Wooli. It's First Nations. So that sort of makes me different to somebody who might say, my culture is French. My culture is this, Spanish, whatever. So that's a very deep part of answer to that question. Culture means the relationships that I have that makes my life full of these community of people that have the same ways of being as I do. And it's really quite different to the way other cultures are. And that's what I find fascinating about other cultures. So we talk differently. You know, we speak a different language, but even when we speak English, we speak a different language. We talk about people from other cultures in a different way. You know, we dress in a traditional way that's very different from the way other people dress. For example, women don't actually wear clothes in our culture. So we paint our bodies, and that's our traditional cultural dress in a way. But it's part of my identity, you know, to be part of this Indigenous culture. I also have an adopted family of Pitjantjatjara, Anangu Pitjantjatjara people who are like what we call my culturally adopted family. So they adopted me 40 years ago. In our culture, when you lose your grandparents, usually someone from another clan or another family will just say, I'm your grandparents, and your grandparents take you through your spiritual and cultural life. So it's very important to have grandparents. So cultures are just amazing. They're the way you operate in the world. They're the way in which you view the world. My culture contains my value system. It contains the laws by which I have to live, the laws of respect, the laws of caring and sharing, the law of keeping harmony on the earth, of living in unconditional love and harmony with all other people. Teaches me how to resolve conflict. It teaches me how to create unity. It also teaches me which relationships I can have and with whom, and all sorts of relationships. So our relationships are very different to, for example, relationships in the dominant culture, white culture. So my skin relationships are more important than my biological relationships. So skin relationship means my spiritual relationship. So in the Anangu Pitjantjatjara, for example, they have a number of different, we call them moieties. And so they're lines of people that you are related to. And they're also the people that you can marry or have relationships with if you want to procreate children. So that's quite different to having aunties and uncles and so on, like you do in white culture.
Yeah.
So culture is an amazing thing. It's just everything, really.
The notion, I'm so envious, the notion of having adopted grandparents, of when you lose someone, of having somebody else come in and fill that role, that is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
That's genius. Now, Tjanara, can you tell me which communities are really, really important to you, and how are you connecting with them at the moment?
Yeah, you mean in Canberra or all over?
Well, in Canberra, but everywhere. Like, which communities do you need in your life, or your life is not worth having?
Well, so many different communities have come into my life, and I've sought out so many different communities. So I would say that the ones that are really important to me, and I might say why as I go along, there are people from the Indian community and people who actually live in India that are very important to me because of my meditation tradition. It's an Eastern form of spirituality, which connects to my Aboriginal spirituality. So, of course, my First Nations community all over the country, just huge networks of them, but my main family as well as my Central Desert family who live out near Uluru. So then I would say the African community is very important to me in Canberra. And the reason why is when I came to Canberra as a young woman, I got very involved in politics and the protest movement. And there were a lot of Africans living here at the time. The ANC, members of the ANC, members of the PAC, because South Africa was still living in apartheid. And we were sort of like buddies on the protest field. They would come to all our protests down at the 10 Embassy and Old Parliament House, and we would go to all of theirs up at the South African Embassy. And so I got very involved as a young woman with the African men and women who were here in this town. There were also a lot of Chilean people here at the time. I'm not sure I said that right, I'm sorry. But there were a lot of immigrants from Chile coming in the 70s and the 80s, and I met so many beautiful men and women from Chile. And I've kept friends with lots of those people. And I said Indians, I said Africans. Women's services is interesting. That I find that's a community for me because in the late 80s, I left the public sector and went into the community sector and worked in women's refuges and in women's services, the Rape Crisis Centre, Tour of Women's Refuge, places like that. And there was this huge community of women and, of course, feminists then. And, you know, that was a whole new movement and a whole new movement for me to learn about. I don't call myself a feminist because it's a philosophy. I understand why it exists and I appreciate it and support it. But in our culture, we have a completely different idea of how relationships between men and women are. Yeah, the women's movement had a huge impact on government policy, for example, but also on the need for looking after and taking care of homeless women who were mentally ill at the time, women who needed to go to the detox and weren't getting services, women who needed a rape crisis centre. And Canberra was well ahead of everywhere else with these kind of services. And so many of those women from the 80s are still my very, very good friends because you just make long friendships with people when you've been in those kind of jobs.
You do. You bond over suffering too, I think. It's terrible. One of the good aspects of something terrible is that, that camaraderie you can form. Goodness, Tjanara, you have done so many things. You've done so many things. Now, Tjanara, can I ask you, who's in your family? Yeah. I'm expecting this to be quite a long answer.
Well, my immediate, I have a biological family, I have a cultural family, a spiritual family. So my immediate biological family is my daughter, Erika Biara, and my granddaughter, Willa Grace Mookie May, and my husband, who, you know, I don't do that sort of ex thing anymore, even though we've been divorced for 35 years. My daughter always sends us a little note on our anniversary every year. I got my 40th anniversary note on the 31st of October because that's the day we got married 40 years ago. And because we're caring for him, he lives with her on the property she owns, so William, and that's my immediate family. Then he has a first family of non-Indigenous people because he's not Indigenous. And so some of those children, his daughter and his daughter's children, are the same age as Erika, and so they're like our extended family on that side. Then I have a huge extended family of blackfellas, First Nations mob, starting with my mother's 7 brothers and sisters, and they've all had, I don't know, there's just got to be hundreds of kids. When we were thinking about having a reunion, we realised we'd have to have 2 or 3 because there's thousands now, just thousands. And so we never forget even our great-grandparents. They're just part of our extended family because they're always with us anyway. Then I have a spiritual family through my practice of meditation, and they live all around the world, very, very close friends that I've known for 35 years. And some of them are Australian, American, they come from Dutchland, France, India, just really important sort of, I call them family. They're extended family because family for me are not just your biological family. They're the people that you really love, that you're really close to. And in our culture, we call everybody, you know, tita, sister, brother, and they're just your extended family. I got cousins that I'm really close to. They got a bunch of kids and a bunch of grandkids, and, you know, we live all over the place. I wish we could all live in one place so we could all just hang out with each other. Yeah, that's my family. Then I got a family of animals.
Which is amazing. There are a lot of people in your life, Tjanara. It's good.
Oh, no, it's beautiful. It's good. And it's a family I chose for myself, you know, and created for myself too.
That's good. Now, tell me about the best thing you've experienced living in Canberra. And I know you haven't always lived in Canberra.
Yeah, the best thing. Gosh, there's so many good things. And you'll probably laugh at this. When I came here as a 20-year-old, I thought the bus system and the transport system was the best ever. Because where I came from, there just was none. You know, like I came from Queensland. Queensland was like the the backwoods it really was under Joe Bjelke-Petersen. Like, there was just nothing. And then you come to Canberra and like you could just jump on a bus and you could just go around everywhere on a bus. It was so great back then. We're talking the late 70s, early 80s. So yeah, the transport system, and everybody complains about it now. And I'm like, what? The buses go everywhere. They're fabulous. Anyway, that's the thing I like about Canberra. I also love that it's like in this valley between all these beautiful mountains, and this place is a sacred place for the Ngunnawal. So there are 3 mountains that are sacred, and Canberra's smack in the middle. And so the way that it was designed by those clever ones who designed it was they designed it right on top of the songline of the Bogon Moth. And that's very special. So it's a site of significance here. It's really a sacred heritage place, because that songline goes, you know, straight through Mount Ainslie, all the way down through the War Memorial, across the lake, through Old Parliament House, the 10 Embassy, up through New Parliament House, and then down the Brindabella Mountains, down into the Snowies. And so that's a sacred energy for us. So that's what I really love about Canberra, that it's smack in the middle of what is a sacred place. Yeah. And I love that it's a bush town and that it's little. Yeah. It's not huge.
It's amazing how many key places for Canberra are on that songline though, isn't it?
It is quite, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to ask you the unpleasant question now. Tell me the worst thing you've experienced in Canberra, or the worst thing that you're happy to share that you've experienced in Canberra.
The worst thing that I'm happy to share. Gosh, it's kind of hard to think of worse things. Oh, I suppose it's the lack of architecture. Oh no, there are 2 things, but I'd have to say the lack of really nice architecture, and that's only because I'm a building freak. I love beautiful buildings and I love architecture. So I'm not going to be elitist. It's just that it's got really sort of like the oldest buildings are those ones in Barton, you know, an old Parliament House, and they're pretty, but what else is there really? But the worst thing when I thought about, you know, you sent me the questions, was when I first came here, I never saw any homelessness or poverty. Never. I don't think it was hidden, because this was a very open town and people didn't live on the streets. And it was a small town, you know, like in the city, right smack in that Northbourne area, just past those older buildings. That was all just red dirt, and there was like pubs there and stuff, and you could just like park your car there. And there was none of that. And I remember my little sister saying to me when she came and stayed like 5-6 years later, and she stayed for, you know, 10 years, the homelessness and the poverty was just really evident, and it really grew very fast, and it was on the streets and you could see it. And that's the thing that I don't like about Canberra, because this is a very rich city. People here do live well and have wealth. And before we had state government, the Commonwealth looked after it, and it was like just the perfect town. And so they were chucking lots of money at it. And then there are all these people who don't have houses to live in. It's like, why not? So I think that's the thing I don't like about it, because I just know we can do so much more with that.
Yeah. I've been here my whole life too. I grew up here, and seeing people who are homeless isn't something we had when I was a kid. And now it's definitely changed. Our view of what a house is has definitely changed. So Tjanara, if you could change one thing about Canberra, what would you change? Magic wand, anything you like.
The architecture.
Go for it. I give you full permission. Rebecca might have a few words to say as the Minister for Heritage, but I give you permission.
And no high rises. Like, I went to work in Woden at the MLC Tower after I, you know, did my computer operator training here. Huge wind tunnels around there in the winter, you know. And I think, why didn't some clever person who understands what happens when you put up those huge buildings with wind, why didn't somebody think about that before they did that? Because it's horrible for human beings. And I guess I don't find high-rise grey concrete buildings aesthetically pleasing. So I know that it's beneficial for population and all that stuff, but I think it needs a bit of character, some kind of character. It's getting character, might take a little while longer, but that's what I'd change. I wouldn't change all the roundabouts and everything. They're the most fantastic thing about Canberra. When I came here, I went and I got my first car, I just drove around those roundabouts. I just loved it because in Aboriginal culture, everything's circles, you know, and I just feel normal if I'm going around circles. That feels right to me.
Top-down view, yeah, it is. We're all circles, aren't we?
Yeah, we're living on circles on sacred ground. It's amazing.
Yeah, right. No, that's right. So what is your greatest hope for the future?
Well, this is what beauty queens say at a pageant, isn't it? To transform the world, or they say world transformation or world peace.
World peace. World peace is the usual, yeah.
Yeah. My hope for the future is that we get, it's a bit existential. So my hope for the future is that we stop greed, ego, you know, anger, rage, that we stop all of those kind of really negative things that human beings do to each other, because we know that impacts the world, it impacts the earth, it impacts the animals, it impacts the way things are in our world. And so I would want that to stop for our future, and that we become people with higher consciousness, you know, that we start thinking about our impact on everything rather than just being mindless, that we could become more mindful about how we have relationships, and that we create families, or families change so that children can grow up in healthy ways, because I believe that we become adults out of what happens in our family of origin. So if you've got families that have a lot of troubles and problems, or parents not being mindful of their behaviour, their whatever, it impacts the child, and then that child's going to grow up either doing the same thing or avoiding it, or ending up in relationships with somebody who is create this society of dysfunctional human beings. So I guess that's my hope for the future, that we do the work that we need to do with each other to just create a better world.
I have never heard that hope for the future from any politician before, Tjanara, and that would be amazing to see you up there with that mindset.
Yeah, thanks.
That would be, yeah.
I could say it's always been my thing. Last 20 years it's been my thing, and I know it's possible. We just have to want to do it with each other. Like I heard people at that COP26 or whatever they call it, COP26, isn't it? And I heard things there that I've never heard politicians at that level say before.
Yep. Yeah, I think politicians have suddenly realised the need to be human.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. People are realising.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. On a lighter note, Tjanara, what's your favourite food?
That's easy. Sri Lankan curry made with tofu, vegan options.
Yes, vegan, yep.
Yes, because I'm vegan. But I had a friend who lived in Sri Lanka, an Australian friend, and when he came home, he said, oh, let me cook this for you. And it was fabulous, and it's the easiest thing to cook in the world, and it's just like soul food. It is soul food. So tofu, carrot, potato, Sri Lankan curry made the proper way.
That sounds really good. I'm going to open up for questions, but before I do, I've got an 11th question for you, Tjanara. Tell us about your book.
Oh, look, I got a book.
I've read this book. This is an amazing book. This is a book with more lives in it than one person's life.
So this book is called A Long Way from No-Go, and the artwork there on the front of it, it was long-listed for the Walkley Award, and it was shortlisted for the Australian Design Award. And so this is my mother, my grandmother and me, but it's also me, my daughter and my granddaughter sitting down on the land. sitting down on our earth, because where I grew up was red dirt earth. And it's called a long way from no-go because my mother and father lived on a big cattle property called No-Go when I was young, when I was born. And No-Go is way out in the western part of Queensland. It's a long way out. And I guess I always felt like I'd come a long way from No-Go in my life, in the way that it went. So it was published in 2018 by Wild Dingo Press, and you can buy it online, easy if you want, or you can buy it from me. So it's just a memoir. It's a story up till now of some of the interesting things I did in Canberra, because I've been here a long time, and interesting things I did in my life traveling around.
There's just, it's just so many amazing lives in there, Tjanara. It's too much for one person, I think. I'm going to mute myself and see if anybody else would like to ask Tjanara a question or maybe share something. Go Bossy.
Hello, thanks, Tjanara. Thanks, Joe, for organizing this and all. For me, as Tjanara was just talking, I think there is just so much that I have learned. And the most, let's say, shocking thing that I have to say is I have just noted some similarities, as she was talking, between her people and we Africans. Who would have thought Africa, is miles and miles away. I think it's the other side, and this is Australia here. But who would have thought that there would be some similar, is it traditions, or I don't know what to use. I haven't done history, sorry, but I hope you'll get what I mean. When you talked of within moieties, you have the moieties which determine who you can marry and who you cannot marry, right? So in Africa, Jen can attest to this. We have a similar thing among the several tribes within, for example, in the country where I originally come from, we've got different tribes, but within each tribe, we've got what we call clans. Maybe that's the moiety. We've got the clans. So if I'm from this clan, I can never marry somebody from the similar clan because they would consider you as family or siblings. And so because they would encourage young people, if they start to date, they would encourage them and bring your friend home just so that we can know who this is. Because if it's from the same clan, try and investigate who's your mom, who's your dad, where did you come from? And then when they found out, oh, they're from the same clan, stop it right there.
That's right.
Don't go further. And if you do go further, you don't get blessings. It's considered a taboo. I don't know if you have that taboo, TABOO.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And of course, the other thing is the extended family. Got my brother, sister, auntie, cousin, uncle, what. All of it, it's like a big get together. So those two things have really stricken me. And I'm like, this is a place which is totally, I don't know whether there's some form of, according to the phylogeny, whether is there some sort of ancestral relationship, and where was the divergence? I don't know. I haven't studied that. I'm not a history student, but maybe you can tell us. But I found that really fascinating and interesting that I just had to share. I don't know if Jane, you can attest to that. I don't know if you have something to add on that.
No, just like Bossy says, yeah, it's quite true. And marrying between clans, it's something that's just a rule within our ethnic group. So it's very similar really to what you're talking about, Tjanara. But maybe we'd have to go back into history to see where the origin of this, because people moved around the world, so you just don't know.
Yeah, it's true. We have lots of oral history stories about how we did travel thousands and thousands of years ago. So that we've sort of got layers of knowledge. So there's the spiritual knowledge, but then there is the actual physical history. And there are clans in Tasmania. And it's interesting that Tasmanians back in the 1800s, when the French went there, they drew them with cornrows, and they looked like actually Africans. And we think they did that because they'd been through Africa, and they tended to draw what they imagined, you know, or what they'd already seen. But there are stories from Tasmanian clans, especially in the north, western side of Tasmania, and all the land was joined together way back. So from Tasmania to Australia, right up through those islands to India and across. So all the land was somehow joined together, and then it got separated by water rising and so on. And that Aboriginal people had walked down and travelled down and stayed in certain parts, you know, on the mainland and then in Tasmania. And the water rose and cut Tasmania off. So there is these stories of connection, particularly to India, the continent of India, and then further over. So that's all I really know. Scientists and people are still doing research because it interests them, and now they're doing genome research as well. It's certainly something that we have all been told, you know, as children, that that's something that exists in our story. But then we've got this spiritual level of how we got here, which is quite different, you know. It's always different to the actual physical thing that people find about walking or travelling. You know, like I read this, got told this story about how the Taiwanese travelled and sailed, and they went all around the Pacific. They just went everywhere. They took their music everywhere. Amazing. So yeah, and some people have done some studies, especially around language. So there are languages on our mainland with words that are similar to words in southern India. And I remember I first went to India 35 years ago, and I've been going every year since. And I wondered why I found it so easy to understand Hindi. Like, I'd never heard Hindi before, but it just seemed like a similar language to my own. And then there are words in South Australia, for example, that are the same as some Hindi words, and in Northern Australia, and someone's done a linguistic study about it. So there is a connection around language.
Jane, you've got a question.
Yeah, I just think really you have a wealth of information and knowledge to share. I mean, just talking, you narrate very easily, and I can just imagine even your granddaughter sitting at your feet and just listening to what you're speaking, because growing up, that's what we did with our grandparents. And that's what, unfortunately, our children have missed, because most of us have moved away from home and all that, and so we don't get that. But just one thing I observed, you said you lived with your parents in Nogo, both your parents, but you seem to talk very much about your mother and, of course, how you were close to her and everything. And I'm just wondering whether your father had any, you know, much of a role to play in your upbringing and shaping your life, and also whether it's just because maybe there are distinct roles between the male and female, because I would say that because of the community I come from, usually the male are the hunters, they go out with the cows, they do whatever, bring money home and take care of the family, while the mothers are the nurturers. So what was the role? Like, did your father have a major role in your upbringing, or not really?
Yeah. So yes, my parents married after the Second World War, and my father had been in the army. He's as far as we know, he is a non-Indigenous man, so he has Irish, Scottish, and Welsh background. There is a bit of sort of, maybe he has some Aboriginal blood, but he never talked about it, so we're not quite sure. But he definitely looked Aboriginal. He was dark. But it's part of the history of colonisation, really, in Australia, that many people in Queensland particularly, and in Tasmania, hid their history if they had dark skin. They said they were Indian or Maori. So George, who was my father's name, he used to always laugh and tell everybody he was the son of an Afghan camel driver, which we knew wasn't true. But you know, he was born and grew up in Charters Towers, which is near Townsville. There's a lot of history, horrible history of violence and separation in Queensland. And he would never talk about his family or anything. We didn't meet his family until he was in his 70s, actually. But mum's side of the family is the very strong, you know, Aboriginal side. And she grew up with her grandfather, and she grew up learning, you know, with language and ceremony and culture. He was what we call a senior lawman, and he had met the first white people that had come to his country. And he died when he was nearly 100, and he kept that all alive, you know. So the strength of our identity and culture is on that side of the family, on my mother's side. George, we never called him Dad, we called him George. George was like an Irish Catholic, really. He came from an Irish Catholic family. His mother was definitely Irish. And he was in some ways, he was always there, always in our lives. Our parents were married all their lives until he passed away. My mother's still alive at 93. He lived to be 80. But I was closer to my mother. I found my father sometimes hard to be with, and I think that's because he was a soldier in the Second World War, and he suffered a lot. He went to New Guinea, and he used to have flashbacks and nightmares and all that kind of stuff, what they call PTSD now, of course. But, you know, he was there in our lives all the time, every day. But really, we were much closer to mum because she did all the kind of teaching you what to do, your value system. George was a bit of a sort of quiet person doing his own thing. Both my parents had 2 jobs each to sort of pay for us to be educated and, you know, to live and survive. But yeah, he was in our lives for sure. It's just that mum taught us all the sort of cultural language, value system stuff. And whenever I came home from school and some nun had said something weird that I didn't kind of understand, or, you know, they'd say Captain Cook discovered Australia, you know, we just knew that wasn't true. And I go home and I'd say to mum, oh, the nun said this today. And mum would say, you know, those Catholics, they don't know everything there is to know about the world. And I'd go, oh, all right, then I don't really have to believe them. You know, I can make up my own mind, but I'd rather believe my mother anyway. And George used to pass on, you know, his bits of wisdom. But yeah, completely different relationship with my father. He used to say to all of us kids, there's 7 of us, he said, I don't care what you want to do, just be happy. And mum was the one that sort of drove us. You know, she wanted us to be educated. We weren't allowed to leave school till we got a university degree. You know, I was too frightened to say, I'm not going to go and get my university degree. I was just like too frightened because she was boss of you, you know. So, yeah, that's what it is. If we'd been in in an Aboriginal community where we weren't subjected to being pushed into being assimilated at the time, that's what was going on in the 50s and the 60s. There was very forced oppression and assimilation into white culture. And so that's why we went into town and started going to school and so on. Things might have been different because I didn't grow up on my grandfather's country like my mother did. And of course, she had a different way of seeing the world because she had grown up that way. Yeah. But definitely they were married all their lives, had lots of kids like good Catholics, all that sort of stuff.
I think we might have time for one more question, and then it's probably time for everyone to go and put their naughty 7-year-olds to bed. Bossy, go.
Yeah, can I just say, so speaking of language, Tjanara, yes, you had that dialect, you know, the local language at home that your mom used to teach you. Then you still had to go to school, right, within the Australian system, you know, to be taught English, etc. I'm just wondering how you managed to integrate both, because it's something, a good example is like consonants and vowels, right? Where I come from, the vowels, we say a, e, I, o, u.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether with the indigenous language, whether you have the same way of saying your vowels, or is it different to what, because here I think it's the A-E, sorry, correct me. Maybe Joe.
A-E-I-O-U, and yours was A-E-I-O.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ours was A-E-I-O-U, such that we don't know whether to say Elaine or Elaine.
I see.
You know, because of the E and the E. Well, E is for ink.
Whoa.
And we can't, and we say elephant, not elephant.
Oh,
you know?
yes,
So,
I see.
because the vowels, you know, A-E-I-O-U. I don't know whether you, well.
Yeah, look, we didn't really have issues with that because Mum spoke the language without English, but she could only do that with other Wakka Wakka people who were nearby that had, you know, full Wakka Wakka lingo.
Yeah.
And they were like 500 kilometres away. So we never, like, the only time I ever heard her speak our language straight without any English was when she taught us the songs. Yeah. And back in the day, there was a law that if Aboriginal people spoke their language, they could be shot or killed, or all sorts of dreadful things used to happen. So Mum never spoke language at home. We only ever spoke it when we went out to Nogo, out to the bush, and she always spoke it mixed with English. So she would chuck in words with English, like she would say binungs, she'd pull your ear and she'd say, you kids never listen, pull them binungs, you know, and she'd do it in the accent because we have an accent. And, you know, she'd be in the kitchen and she'd be saying something and she'd chuck in some words, you know. So that's how we learned our language. We learned it with English because from sort of day one, we're going into this white culture. And so that was it. We didn't learn Wakka Wakka as our first language. We learned words with English. And now my daughter actually is teaching herself and her daughter to speak Wakka Wakka without English, which is fabulous because our language has been completely revived without English. Still a lot of Wakka Wakka speakers. But yeah, the only time I heard Mum actually speak Wakka Wakka was when one of her old friends came to visit, and they were sitting in the lounge room like this. I was like, wow, listen to that. And now my daughter's got it like chalked all over her lounge room. She's got the words all up on this board for her daughter, teaching her the words and putting it all together. We've got a few Wakka Wakkas who are linguists, so they're doing the whole language, and it's really, really good. Yeah. But no, we didn't have any trouble with it. We just did English like everybody else.
You essentially had two first languages.
Yeah, and you know, in our culture, we say our first language is silence.
Far out.
We have a very deep way, our spiritual way of being is to be in Dabiri as much as possible, which is to be in silence and quietness and speak through the mind. So children are trained from a very young age to use their mental telepathy and intuition to speak. So, for example, when I go out to Murujulu before my grandmother passed away, and still with my relatives out there, she would send a message to me with her mind, and I'd pick it up in Canberra. Or if I was out there and I was staying, you know, at my sister's house, and Nana was coming from her house, Dorothy would say, Nana's on her way, and I could feel the energy of her coming in the car because she's sending a message with the power of her mind. So that's our language. That's our first language.
Far out.
To not use words. And they really develop that. You spend your whole life training.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, yeah. You would have to. Far out. You've now left me speechless. This is Tjanara, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm going to close off now, but I'm really hoping we see everybody next month. And it's just lovely, these sessions, hearing all the stories, and some of the stories are so different, and some of them have these wonderful common themes, Bossy and Jane. It's so good to there's so much commonality. I think even Canberra's transport system, there's so much, there's a lot of, it's interesting. There's diversity, and there's universality, and there's just different things that connect us. It's really, good to hear, I think.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
Good
Good evening, everybody.
Be coming for the next few. Yes.
Come to the next one. Come to the next one. And yeah, we'll keep doing this series. I think it's good fun.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon. So nice to
Thanks,
see you.
Tjanara.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye, Joe. Bye, Bossy.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
Andrew.
Bye.
Bye, Jordan. Bye, Wes.
Bye.
Bye, Amy.